Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, joins me now, also the MP for Hertsmere. Lovely to see you, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning.
Happy Christmas.
Nice to see
You're looking
you,
festive
Camilla.
over there with the tree next to you.
Merry Christmas to you too, if it's a little bit early.
It is a little
Not
early.
my choice of backdrop, but it's very nice.
Never too early. Now, look, I don't want to ruin your Christmas cheer, Mr Dowden, but let's have a look at Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan. He said that he would stop the boats by the end of the year, that debt would be falling, that he would grow the economy, that he would halve inflation, and he would cut NHS waiting lists. It's not really been a success. We can perhaps give him inflation, but that's more or less it. So actually, this 5-point plan has turned out to be a failure, hasn't it?
Well, let's take each of them in turn. As you rightly say, we've actually halved inflation. And that has a real consequence, by the way. It means that now we're seeing wages rising faster than inflation. And when those tax cuts we announced recently come into force at the beginning of January, people are going to get 450 quid more in their pockets next year. So I think we can give that one
not
quite a
stop the
large
boats.
thumbs up.
Debt hasn't come down. Waiting lists are going up. The economy is stagnant.
Well, let's deal next with stopping the boats. If you'd said at the beginning of the year that we'd managed to get the number of boats down by a third, when if you look, for example, at Italy, the number are up 80%. We're making progress, but key to that is our Rwanda legislation, which, by the way, Conservatives backed and every single Labour and Lib Dem MP voted against. We've got more to do on that, but I would say we're making progress on it.
But only 1% of the British public think the plan will work, so it's hardly a ringing endorsement from a political perspective, is it, Mr Dowden?
Well, I'm actually confident that this legislation does the job.
You said that to me last year, though. You said you were confident these flights would take off.
It's aimed at ending this vicious cycle of litigation, stopping people being removed to Rwanda who've arrived here illegally and can't be deported to their home country, and entrenching the treaty that was entered into by the Home Secretary. If you then move on to the others, which I think you started on, which was in respect of growth, actually the growth forecasts have been revised upwards in terms of our bouncing out of COVID. And if you look at the strength of the UK economy, whether it's having the third largest AI sector in the world after the US and China, whether you look at the fact that actually our manufacturing base is now bigger than France, I'm actually really confident when I talk to
Mr Dowden
and others about the prospects for this country, and they say, why are you talking us down? It's been difficult, but I think there is real progress to come next year.
I'm never one to talk Britain down, or indeed its economy. I'm a champion for Britain and all it stands for, but I'm sorry, you cannot possibly look at the growth forecasts that have been produced in line with the autumn statement and be cheering them from the rafters. It's stagnant. You know, we should be growing much more quickly and at a much greater rate. And that's on you. That's on 13 years of Tory rule. Why are we in this situation? You can't be celebrating that.
Well, actually, if you look at the autumn statement, if you look at the measures we announced, that the OBR themselves acknowledged that it add an extra 0.5% to growth. If you look at our performance over 25 to 28, the next period, it sees us growing faster than France, Germany and many other countries. But of course, there is more to do, and that's why, for example, we're focusing on business investment, and thanks to the full deduction of expenses, we're seeing greater business investment in this country than even a country like the United States. What I'm saying really is that the measures that the Prime Minister and Chancellor announced are actually putting the building blocks in place to deal with the growth challenge, which I don't doubt has been a big problem.
But they're not working, are they? Because Rishi Sunak's approval rating keeps on tanking. He's now less popular than Boris Johnson was when he resigned. His approval rating is -49. I've had Mark Francois on here earlier, and you'll be familiar with his ERG group and the caucus of right-wingers within the party that want this legislation to be amended. He's basically saying that it's do or die. And as far as these figures are concerned, I mean, Rishi Sunak is now less popular than he was a year ago.
Well, actually, if you look at what Rishi Sunak has done over the past year, he has been taking difficult decisions, which I think will yield results, and then has made progress, whether that's signing that CTPPP, entering into the largest trading bloc in the world, whether it's finally moving us to a post-Brexit world with the Windsor framework, whether it's the biggest tax cuts that we've had since the 1980s.
But it's not moved the dial, Mr. Dowden.
When you take difficult decisions, when you take those difficult decisions, it takes a while for the results to be seen.
But you haven't got long, have you?
Next year, people will see the benefit of that. And moreover, yeah, well, it actually relates to that point, which is, you know, in the years before an election is all what do you think of the incumbent government? When you get into an election year, it's a contrast. And there's a contrast between what I've described about Rishi Sunak and the government and Labour. I caught the end of what you were saying, this idea that Starmer is trying to be like Blair in the run-up to 97, carrying the Ming vase across the highly polished floor, not dropping it. People would be wise to the fact that when it comes to Rwanda or any of these other issues, he just thinks by keeping stum, it can come to him. Well, I think that's not going to sustain next year. When
two more quick questions.
This person that can be in one parliament, both Thatcherite and a Corbynite, it's extraordinary.
Two more quick questions. Are you going to amend this Rwanda legislation to keep the right of the party happy?
Well, we will make sure that we have the right piece of legislation. It's not about keeping
Are you going to amend
one
it?
Part of the party happy or another part of the happy. Look, I'm confident that the Prime Minister's looked at this very carefully and has got the best possible measures. But if there are ways of improving it further, just as with any piece of legislation, we'll work with backbench members of Parliament, including Conservatives. If we can make it even better, of course we'll do that.
And should we see all of Lord Cameron's financial interests? They've been covered up by a blind trust. That's not right. He's a very senior member of the Cabinet. He's Foreign Secretary. Why is all of this being kept under wraps?
Well, we have a process for doing this. There's an independent advisor on ministers' interests. He goes through all of the interests and then he advises on the most appropriate ones to declare. That advice has been followed fully. It's the way that's been dealt with for many years, and I think that's the appropriate way to address these things.
If they are Chinese or indeed UAE-controlled interests, Nigel Farage is right to have written in the Telegraph yesterday that Lord Cameron should have nothing to do with the decision-making around the ownership of the Telegraph. Should he, Mr. Dowden? You're a former Culture Secretary. What do you think of the idea of a national newspaper being owned by a foreign state?
Well, I have to be a little careful on this one because there's two potential decisions makers in respect of this. First of all, there's the Culture Secretary, and you know where she's got to in terms of issuing that notice and it going to the
What
CMA.
do you think, though?
There may be an issue at some point. This is the key point. There's also a process under the National Security and Investment Act where I make decisions in a quasi-judicial capacity. So I can't prejudge any decisions that may come to me in respect of it. But in your wider point, in the role of the Foreign Secretary, it really is the Culture Secretary and the NSIA process. Those are independent quasi-judicial processes.
And finally, I'm speaking to Nigel Farage in just a moment. Would you welcome him back into the Conservative Party, Mr. Dowden?
Well, I don't think the Conservative Party needs Nigel Farage to win the next election. Nigel Farage has been supporting UKIP for many years. If he wishes to join the Conservative Party, that's a matter for him.
But aren't you worried about the threat from reform? They're at 11% now in the polls. They're going to eviscerate some of the Tory votes in the shires, aren't they?
Well, you know better than I do, Camilla, that these polls go up and down. In the end, there's only two people that can be Prime Minister after the next election, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, and we will be making vigorously the case for Rishi Sunak to be our Prime Minister with a majority Conservative government.
Oliver Dowden, thank you very much for joining me this morning.